Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. If you only know Harry Potter through the films, you might think Ron Weasley is just an insecure friend, always cracking jokes and jealous of Harry and Hermione. But book readers know a different truth. Ron isn't just a backdrop to Harry's glory. He's a loyal, brave, and evolving character whose most important moments were either cut or distorted in the movies. Today, we'll remember best moments when Ron proved himself to be a true hero, not just comic relief, and maybe after this, you'll see him in a whole new light. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Showed courage, volunteered to go after Nagini. The final battle of Hogwarts. Harry realizes that one of the last Horcruxes, Nagini, is near Voldemort in the Shrieking Shack. It's a deadly mission. Harry must stay behind because the Dark Lord is most likely waiting for him. That's when Ron steps forward. "So you can't go?" he says. That's what he wants. "You stay here and take care of Hermione. I'll go and get her." No hesitation, no drama, just resolve, and a quiet willingness to risk his life for the cause. This is Ron, one the films never bothered to show. Number 2. Defended Hermione from Snape. Snape was even crueler in the books than in the films. Hermione, with her relentless hunger for knowledge, was often a target. When he calls her an insufferable know-it-all and deducts points from Gryffindor, Hermione lowers her eyes, humiliated and hurt. And Ron stands up. You asked a question, she knows the answer. Why ask if you don't want to be told? It wasn't just a protest. It was open defiance of one of the most intimidating teachers at Hogwarts. And even though Ron sometimes teased Hermione himself, he knew the difference between friendly banter and public humiliation. Number 3. Proved his loyalty, ignored Percy's attempt to turn him against Harry. 5th year. The Ministry is on a witch hunt against anyone speaking the truth about Voldemort's return. Ron's older brother Percy, who chose his career over his family, sends Ron a letter. He congratulates him on becoming prefect, but urges him to stay away from Harry and Dumbledore. Ron's response is instant. He doesn't even answer. He rips the letter into pieces. To him, friendship means more than politics, more than ambition, even more than family approval. He's the world's biggest prat, he says. No doubts, just unwavering loyalty. Number 4. Stood in front of Sirius Black. When the trio first meets Sirius in the Shrieking Shack, they believe he's a murderer. Ron, already injured, still positions himself protectively in front of Harry and shouts, "If you want to kill Harry, you'll have to kill us too!" One of the most powerful scenes in the book. Ron is literally shaking from pain, but he defends his friend without hesitation. In the film, that line was given to Hermione, and one of Ron's greatest acts of bravery vanished from the screen. Number 5. Helped Gryffindor win the Quidditch Cup. Ron was never a natural athlete. He was nervous, self-doubting, and his early matches as Gryffindor's keeper were clumsy. The Slytherins even made up a mocking song, "Weasley is our king." But Ron didn't give up. He kept playing. And in the final match of the season, he did the impossible. He blocked the crucial goals and secured victory. They carried him through the castle on their shoulders, singing, "Ronald Weasley, he's our king. With him, we'll always win. Let him guard the ring." The movie, not a word. Quidditch was completely cut from the 5th film, along with Ron's shining moment. Number 6. Became a prefect against all expectations. 5th year brought more than Quidditch. A new surprise. Ron was named a prefect. Neither he nor Harry expected it. Everyone assumed the school's golden boy, Harry, would get the badge, but it was Ron, the boy in the shadows, who was chosen to lead. "I never thought I'd be picked," he exclaimed. A moment that wasn't epic or dramatic, but deeply human. Ron didn't feel worthy, and that's exactly what made him so real. Number 7. Fought Draco Malfoy during a Quidditch match. The Quidditch match had barely begun when Draco Malfoy, flanked by Crabbe and Goyle, started his usual taunts. He mocked Harry's lack of family, sneered at Neville's clumsiness, and tossed insults like they were part of the game. Most students might have ignored him, but Ron didn't. He didn't hesitate. One moment, Malfoy smirked. The next, Ron launched himself at him, fists flying. Ron dived on Malfoy just as Snape came up the stands, the book says. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't planned. It was instinct, loyalty in motion. Ron didn't stop to consider the consequences. He knew Malfoy was cruel, that his words were meant to wound, and he wouldn't stand by while his friends were humiliated. Neville joined the fight too, clumsily but bravely, and suddenly they weren't just spectators, they were a team. It got them all in trouble, of course, but it also showed who Ron really was. He wasn't just the funny sidekick, he was the boy who'd throw punches for the people he cared about, even when he knew he'd pay for it. Number 8. Supported Harry during the dueling club incident. The moment the snake hissed and Harry answered, the great hall froze. Whispers spread like wildfire. Did you hear that? He's a Parselmouth. Fear twisted into suspicion. In the film, students back away in silence. But in the book, the reaction is sharper. Accusations, murmurs of Slytherin's heir. And through it all, Ron doesn't step back. He stays beside Harry. That's what Salazar Slytherin was famous for, he says, his voice low but steady. Parseltongue. You could be his descendant? It sounds grim, but Ron isn't accusing. He's helping Harry make sense of what just happened. He doesn't turn away. He doesn't flinch. While others pull back, Ron walks with Harry through the corridors, shields him from questions, and never once doubts him. He explains what Parseltongue is, why it matters, and why people are scared. But he doesn't join them. He chooses Harry. Not the rumors, not the fear, just Harry. That choice, quiet and unwavering, is what makes Ron's loyalty unshakable, even when his best friend suddenly sounds like a snake. Number 9. Stood by Lupin despite his secret. When the news spread that Remus Lupin was a werewolf, whispers turned into fear. Parents complained, teachers distanced themselves, the ministry did nothing to defend him, and in the end, Lupin resigned. In the film, his departure was quiet, barely acknowledged, but in the book, Ron doesn't let it pass. He's stunned, angry even. He was the best defense teacher we ever had, Ron says, slamming his spoon into a plate. It wasn't about grades or popularity. It was about fairness. Ron didn't grow up around werewolves. His knowledge came from the same place as everyone else's, books, rumors, bedtime stories meant to scare children. But unlike most, he refused to let fear twist his judgment. Lupin had taught them well, protected them, cared for them. That mattered more than a label. That's not right, Ron said when he heard Lupin was leaving. He never hurt anyone. And just like that, he showed more maturity than most adults around him. This wasn't bravado, it was quiet, clear-eyed loyalty. Ron wasn't trying to impress anyone. He simply recognized kindness when he saw it and defended it. In a castle full of gossip and suspicion, he stood still while others turned away. Ron believed in Lupin, not despite his condition, but because he knew the kind of man Lupin chose to be. That moment didn't need a wand or a fight, it just needed decency. Ron had plenty of it. Number 10 felt sympathy for Winky, the house elf. Winky sat in the corner of the Hogwarts kitchen, clutching a butterbeer bottle and sobbing uncontrollably. She had been dismissed by Barty Crouch, cast out for something she didn't do. Most students didn't care. Some laughed. Even Hermione, in her fierce drive for justice, often spoke about Winky as a cause, not a person. But Ron saw her differently. He didn't mock her. He didn't dismiss her tears. He looked at her, broken and confused, and felt something that the films never showed. Real, quiet empathy. Ron wasn't always on board with SPOEW. He rolled his eyes at Hermione's knitting. He joked about house elves loving their work. But when it came to Winky, his reaction was different. He said, "That's not right, chucking her out like that." He saw the pain in her eyes. He heard the tremble in her voice. Winky wasn't just a symbol. She was a creature who had given her life to a wizarding family and was discarded like trash. Ron didn't need to start a movement to recognize cruelty when he saw it. That moment revealed a side of Ron the movies ignored. He wasn't just comic relief or the jealous best friend. He had a heart that hurt for others, even when he didn't fully understand their world. Winky's story mattered to him. He didn't yell about it. He didn't make speeches, but he knew it was wrong. And he said so. That quiet decency, that instinct to defend someone powerless, is exactly what made Ron Weasley more than just a sidekick. Number 11 fought bravely at the Ministry of Magic. The battle in the Department of Mysteries was chaos. Spells ricocheted, shadows moved, Death Eaters appeared from every corner. In the film, Ron fades into the background, but in the book, he stands firm. When Antonin Dolohov casts a brutal curse that leaves Ron dazed and confused, it doesn't take him out of the fight. Staggering, pale, and barely coherent, he still clutches his wand, trying to protect Hermione from the masked figures closing in. Even while affected by a jinx that causes him to laugh uncontrollably and behave erratically, Ron never flees. Ron was giggling weakly on the floor, clutching his stomach. But when Harry checks on him, he's still trying to get up, still reaching for his wand. That isn't weakness, that's courage. Real courage, the kind that pushes through fear, pain, and confusion just to keep going. He's injured, yes, but he's not defeated. In the final moments of the battle, as the prophecy shatters and the Order of the Phoenix arrives, Ron is still there, not because he's the strongest, not because he's the fastest, but because he refuses to abandon his friends. The films gave the spotlight to others, but the book gives Ron his due. He fought, he bled, and he stayed. That is the heart of who Ron Weasley truly is. Number 12 encouraged Neville in potions class. Neville Longbottom always trembled at the sight of Severus Snape. In the dungeons, surrounded by cauldrons and scowls, he could barely hold a ladle without spilling something. Snape's voice cut like a whip. "Pathetic, Longbottom," he would sneer. And Neville, bright as he was deep inside, would shrink into silence. But in Goblet of Fire something shifted. That day, Neville managed to brew a passable potion. And it wasn't just talent. It was Ron Weasley leaning over, whispering hints, keeping him steady. Rowling doesn't exaggerate it. She lets the moment breathe. Ron didn't boast or take credit. He just nudged Neville in the right direction. Small tips, quiet encouragement. "You're doing all right, Neville," Ron said under his breath. "Just don't let the flame get too high." Neville nodded, pale but focused. And for once, when Snape stormed past, he didn't stop to insult him. The potion was acceptable. More than that, it was correct. Neville's eyes widened. He had done it, and Ron was grinning at him, proud. This scene never made it into the film, but it mattered, not just for Neville's self-esteem, but for Ron's character. He saw someone struggling and decided to lift him up. He didn't mock him, he didn't ignore him, he helped, quietly, instinctively. No spotlight, no applause, just real friendship in a cold classroom ruled by fear. Ron wasn't always the loudest or the brightest in class, but he understood what it meant to need support. He had felt overlooked, second best, too many times himself. That's why his encouragement meant something. Neville didn't just brew a potion that day, he took a step out of his shell, and Ron made it possible. Not with magic, just with kindness. Number 13 comforted Harry after the maze. When Harry returned from the maze in Goblet of Fire, he was not the same. He was covered in cuts, trembling, and holding the lifeless body of Cedric Diggory. The Triwizard Tournament had ended in horror, and Hogwarts fell into stunned silence. In the film, Dumbledore takes control. Hermione cries in the distance. But in the book, it's Ron who finds Harry in the hospital wing afterward. And he doesn't ask questions. He doesn't demand an explanation. He simply sits by Harry's bed and lets him know, without saying anything, that he's there. J.K. Rowling writes, Ron came running up the ward. For a moment Harry thought he was going to hug him. Instead he gave him a very clumsy pat on the arm. That one gesture carries more than any speech could. Ron is awkward. He's never been great at emotions, but in this moment he shows up for his friend when it matters most. Harry had been forced to watch Voldemort rise again. He had heard Cedric's last breath. He had screamed to return with Cedric's body. What he needed wasn't comfort. It was presence. And Ron gave him that. The trauma of the graveyard never truly leaves Harry, but Ron never pressures him to talk. Later, when Hermione joins them and the trio sits quietly in the hospital wing, there's a kind of unspoken agreement between them. Whatever happened in that maze, they would face the consequences together. Ron's way of supporting Harry is subtle. No dramatic vows, no promises of revenge, just the quiet strength of being near someone when they're too broken to ask for help. The films didn't show this. They focused on Dumbledore's urgency and the Ministry's denial. But they missed the heartbeat of that chapter, how Ron, still just a 16-year-old boy, understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is simply not leave them alone. When Harry opened his eyes and saw Ron sitting there, it wasn't magic, it was friendship. And in that world of curses and darkness, it mattered just as much. Number 14 came up with the escape plan from the Ministry. The air in the Ministry was dense with paranoia and the scent of fear, a building where magic clung to every corner like cobwebs. It was not the ideal place for a rescue, nor was it meant for acts of rebellion. But among the hallways, shadowed by bureaucracy and tyranny, a boy with red hair was quietly calculating their next move. Ron Weasley, disguised as Ministry employee Reginald Catamol, walked with quickened steps past enchanted typewriters and watchful eyes, all while a storm of strategy brewed in his mind. While the film adaptation of Deathly Hallows gave the spotlight to Harry and Hermione, the book immortalized a different tale, one where Ron didn't just follow orders, but forged them under fire. The plan had already begun to unravel the moment they stepped into the Ministry. The Polyjuice potion was wearing thin, Mafalda Hopkirk was drawing attention, and Harry, in disguise as Runcorn, was starting to lose his grip on the situation. The trio had underestimated just how suffocating the Ministry's air would be. Ron, however, adapted with unexpected sharpness. Unlike Hermione, who was struggling to navigate her role in the improper use of magic office, or Harry, who was dragged into the internal politics of Dolores Umbridge's department, Ron played his part with quiet efficiency. As Reg Catamol, a maintenance worker, no one expected him to speak or lead. And that anonymity became his shield. When the time came to make their escape, chaos had already begun to seep through the building. Yaxley was suspicious, Umbridge was furious, and the truth about Mary Catamol's Muggle heritage was being laid bare. It was in this moment that Ron saw something no one else did: opportunity. While Hermione focused on stunning Umbridge and helping Mary flee, and Harry retrieved the locket, it was Ron who quietly disappeared into the heart of the Ministry, using Catamol's badge to slip past checkpoints and recalibrate their exit strategy. The movie skips over this part, omitting Ron's solo navigation through the underbelly of magical law and order. The book tells us that Ron had been sent to fix a rainstorm inside Yaxley's office, an errand that seemed like a distraction, but in fact gave Ron access to a lesser-known maintenance corridor. As he climbed down into the pipes, the roaring rain soaking his disguise, he found a series of maintenance chutes that connected to the lifts. These chutes, meant for magical waste and storage, had barely been considered secure. But Ron saw more than a tangle of pipes. He saw a potential escape route. While Hermione and Harry were still maneuvering through their own missions, Ron was making mental notes of where the chutes led, where they echoed, and which ones emptied closest to the atrium. His moment came not with flair, but with firm resolve. After regrouping with Harry and Hermione and realizing that the fireplace they intended to use for their escape via the Floo network was under tighter surveillance than expected, it was Ron who proposed the new path. "We'll use the maintenance chute," he said, in the book, a line that might seem offhand, but which reflected hours of observation and silent planning. Ron had not just stumbled upon the plan, he had made it. "There's a waste chute on level 3 near the Department of Magical Accidents. It connects to the atrium." His voice, often unsure or full of sarcasm, had turned certain. In that moment, he wasn't just the funny sidekick, he was the tactician. The Ministry was collapsing in on itself as they moved. Shouts rang through the corridors, alarms echoed like metallic screams. The confusion spread like fire, and through it all, Ron guided them with an instinct born not of brilliance, but of empathy and logic. He knew how the Ministry treated its low-level workers. He knew which passageways they avoided, which corners were blind spots. His upbringing as one of many Weasleys had taught him how to listen when others didn't speak, and that instinct saved them. While Harry held on to the locket and Hermione protected Mary, Ron directed their escape like a silent conductor, choosing moments to pause, to move, to divert. In one striking moment that the movie left behind, Ron led them through a storeroom filled with broken prophecy orbs, dodging detection by disguising their magical signatures under a mass of enchanted debris. He used a misfiring charm, cast Offio, that caused a stack of parchment to explode behind them, drawing guards away from their route. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't clean, but it was effective, and it was Ron's doing. He didn't freeze, he didn't panic. He moved with a clarity born of desperation, but shaped by cunning. Even in their final dash toward the atrium, it was Ron who spotted the corridor where 2 guards had left their posts. It was Ron who whispered, "Wait, not yet," when Hermione wanted to sprint. And it was Ron who signaled them forward with one word, "Now!" timed precisely to the shifting of the guard rotation. These weren't lucky guesses, these were calculations. While the wizarding world often saw Ron as the shadow behind Harry's lightning bolt, this moment in the Ministry proved he was far more than a silhouette. He was the architect of their survival. As they dove into the fireplace and the emerald flames licked around them, Ron was the last to leave. He made sure Harry had the locket. He double-checked that Hermione and Mary were through. He lingered just long enough to send a minor explosion down the hallway, a diversion that sent dozens of Ministry officials sprinting in the wrong direction. The moment he vanished into the Floo network was not a retreat, but a tactical victory. He had led them into hell and guided them out. Number 15 cared for Hermione after Malfoy Manor. After they escaped the Malfoy Manor, the group arrived at Shell Cottage, battered and broken. Hermione Granger, usually composed and quick-witted, was silent. Her skin bore the angry red marks of the word mudblood, carved into her flesh by Bellatrix Lestrange's cruel knife. She sat curled in on herself, wrapped in a blanket, but it was more than just the pain of her wounds that haunted her. There was a stillness in her eyes that frightened even the twins. But Ron Weasley did not leave her side. Ron, the boy who once complained about studying, who made jokes to cover fear, had changed. He had seen Hermione scream. He had heard her voice shatter in that cold, cursed drawing room, and something inside him broke when she did. In the days that followed, he became her silent shadow, not with grand declarations or awkward speeches, but with simple acts of unrelenting devotion. He brought her tea without asking. He fetched the thickest blankets from the cupboard. He held her hand when she trembled in her sleep. It was not about heroism. It was about love and how quietly it could be spoken. Harry noticed it first. Hermione had always been Ron's match in arguments, his rival in class, his partner in mischief. But now she leaned on him, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And Ron never once looked annoyed or burdened. He moved with a kind of reverence, speaking only when she was ready, waiting as long as it took. In those quiet days at the cottage, Ron seemed to understand her without needing her to say a word. He didn't force her to talk about what had happened. He just made sure she had everything she needed to feel safe again. At night, when the others had gone to bed, Ron stayed awake longer. He sat on the floor next to the couch where Hermione slept, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing the grain of the wooden floor. Sometimes she woke, gasping from a nightmare, and Ron was there before she even had to call his name. He didn't speak, didn't ask, he just sat closer. His presence alone was enough. She would reach for him, half-conscious, and he would hold her hand until she fell asleep again. Ron's care was not something he performed for others to see. He wasn't trying to be brave or noble. He simply couldn't bear the thought of Hermione suffering, not after what she had endured. Bellatrix had tried to reduce her to nothing, to humiliate and destroy her, but Ron made it his mission to remind Hermione of who she was. Every gesture, bringing her books, helping her brush the tangles out of her hair, shielding her from noise, was a way of anchoring her back to herself. The book describes a scene that never made it into the films, and yet it speaks volumes about Ron's growth. He was the one who helped Hermione through the aftermath, not just with healing potions, but with constant, quiet love. Ron had taken over the task of helping Hermione, the narration says, gently assisting her with everything, never complaining, never embarrassed by her vulnerability. These words were not meant to shock. They were written to reveal a truth that the movies never dared to explore, that Ron, in his purest form, was exactly who Hermione needed. There was one moment when Fleur brought Hermione soup, and Hermione, her hands trembling too badly to lift the spoon, looked away in frustration. Before she could say a word, Ron took the spoon, dipped it into the bowl, and patiently fed her. He did it without hesitation, without ceremony, and without comment. His eyes never left hers, and though he said nothing, the message was clear. You're not broken. I see you. I love you. That scene, so intimate, so human, was never filmed, but it lives in the pages. Later, when the pain had lessened and she could move without wincing, Hermione finally spoke of that night. Not to Harry, not to Bill or Fleur, but to Ron. She whispered a few words in the garden, away from everyone else. He didn't ask questions, he just listened, his eyes wide, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he did not rush to tell her everything would be all right. Instead, he simply nodded and reached out for her hand. Hermione didn't let go. This was not the Ron Weasley who had left them in a moment of weakness. This was a Ron transformed by regret and love, who had learned that bravery was not always loud. It could be soft, almost invisible. It could be sitting quietly beside someone who no longer knew how to feel safe. He had failed them once. Now he refused to fail her again. The wound on Hermione's arm healed, but slowly. It left a scar, not just on her skin, but on her spirit. Sometimes she would catch her reflection in the window and flinch. Ron noticed. He began covering mirrors when she was near. Not all of them, just the ones in the rooms she frequented. It was a small gesture, almost silly, but it showed that he saw her pain and respected it. He wasn't trying to erase what happened. He was trying to help her move beyond it. Ginny asked him once, in a low voice, why he was acting differently. Ron looked away and said, "Because it could have been worse, because I wasn't there soon enough, because she's Hermione." He didn't need to say more. Ginny understood. Everyone who knew them did. The tension between Ron and Hermione had always been laced with banter and blushing, but now it had deepened into something raw and unspoken. They had faced the edge of death together. Now they faced the harder part, survival. Number 16 helped Harry destroy the Elder Wand. Of all the moments lost in translation from page to screen, The absence of Ron Weasley's quiet but crucial role in the fate of the Elder Wand remains one of the most significant. It is a scene without explosions, without duels, without grand speeches. Yet it contains one of the most profound reflections on power, friendship, and the human soul that J.K. Rowling ever wrote. In the book Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, after the dust has settled and Voldemort lies lifeless in the Great Hall, there is still one final decision left for Harry to make. And it is Ron, not Dumbledore, not Hermione, who stands beside him, offering guidance that will change the course of magical history. This is not a moment of bravado, but of moral clarity, and Ron's quiet wisdom is all the more powerful for its subtlety. After Voldemort's defeat, Harry finds himself holding the most powerful wand in existence, the Elder Wand, the final of the Deathly Hallows, the fabled instrument that has changed masters through centuries of bloodshed. In the film adaptation, Harry simply snaps the wand in half and throws it into a chasm, a simple gesture meant to symbolize the end of an era. But the book offers something more human, more nuanced, and Ron's involvement in this scene is not only telling of his character, but essential to understanding the emotional depth of the final chapter. As Harry reveals his intention not to keep the wand, Ron listens, processes, and, without judgment or envy, suggests something no one else does. Return it to Dumbledore's tomb. It is in this suggestion that Ron reveals his true maturity. Over the course of the series, Ron has often been the one overshadowed by Harry's fame, Hermione's intellect, even by his own brothers. But in this moment, he becomes a figure of grounded insight. He doesn't tell Harry what to do, he simply offers a path, a place for the wand to rest, a way to honor the man who once wielded it. Harry listens. He considers. And though the final decision is his, it is Ron's voice that anchors him, that gently steers him away from the intoxication of power. This is the Ron who stood by Harry when no one else did, the Ron who left and came back, not as a perfect hero, but as a flawed friend who grew through pain and doubt. The same Ron who once dreamed of glory, of standing alone with the Quidditch cup in his hands, now shows that he understands the weight of power better than most. He sees in the Elder Wand not just a relic, but a threat, a lingering temptation, something that could, in time, corrupt even Harry. His words are few, but they matter. In the book, Harry says, "I'm putting the Elder Wand back where it came from. It can stay there. If I die a natural death like Ignotus, its power will be broken, won't it?" Ron doesn't argue. He doesn't try to claim it. He simply trusts his friend, and in doing so helps him do the right thing. It is worth remembering the history of the Elder Wand. Passed from master to master through death, it represents the darkest craving of the magical world, the thirst for invincibility. Grindelwald stole it. Dumbledore took it from him in a legendary duel. Voldemort desecrated Dumbledore's grave to possess it, and now Harry, who defeated its last master, holds it. The world has seen what this wand can do. Ron knows this. He doesn't have to say it. He doesn't need to recount the horrors they've witnessed. Instead, he points backward, to the man who once held the wand with humility, and forward, to a future when no one will need to. There's something sacred about Ron's silence in that moment, where another character might have been tempted to argue, to challenge, to ask, what if? Ron simply reflects. His own journey, marred by jealousy and insecurity, has led him to a place where he no longer needs to prove anything. He doesn't ask for the wand, though he knows its power. He doesn't urge Harry to keep it, though it could be a safeguard. Instead, he supports the idea of closure, of letting go. It's an echo of Dumbledore's own warnings, a reflection of the values they've fought to protect. Hermione, always the voice of reason, is there too. She's the one who helped Harry understand the significance of the Deathly Hallows, who worked tirelessly to decipher the clues left behind. But it is Ron who speaks with the voice of someone who has seen what power can do and chooses a different path. In that small suggestion to return the wand to Dumbledore's grave, Ron offers Harry a way to honor not just Dumbledore but himself. It's an act of healing, of placing a burden down instead of carrying it forever. In the film, the choice to have Harry break the wand is visually striking. It's decisive, final, a physical gesture that mirrors the destruction of Horcruxes, but it also removes the emotional complexity of the book's ending. There is something deeply moving about the idea of returning the wand to its last peaceful resting place, of undoing what Voldemort did, of restoring dignity, not just ending threat. And it is Ron who makes that possible, not through a grand act, but through a suggestion, a quiet word of support. This scene, understated and almost invisible to those who pass through the book too quickly, is part of what makes Ron such a vital figure in the trio. He is not just comic relief, not just a loyal sidekick. He is the conscience that speaks when no one else dares. He is the friend who sees what must be done, even when it's hard, and in that moment, with the most powerful wand in history in his friend's hand, Ron Weasley chooses peace. Number 17. Supported Ginny after the diary incident. After the harrowing ordeal in the Chamber of Secrets, when the basilisk was finally slain and Tom Riddle's shadow dispersed, the Hogwarts students celebrated their liberation with light hearts. But amidst the laughter and the return of petrified students stood a girl too quiet for such joy. Ginny Weasley, usually vibrant, with a smile that mirrored the warmth of her home at the Burrow, now seemed smaller, subdued, and lost in a fog of shame. In the movie, her pain is brushed aside, quickly overtaken by the thrill of Harry's triumph. But in the pages of the book, the silence around Ginny's suffering is filled with something else entirely: Ron's quiet, unwavering presence. Ron Weasley had every reason to be overwhelmed. He had just fought for his life alongside Harry in the chamber, faced a giant spider days earlier, nearly died of fright more than once, and had spent an entire year watching his little sister fade into a ghost of herself. And yet in those days that followed, he did not return to the Great Hall to bask in the adulation, nor did he wander the grounds in idle relaxation. He stayed near Ginny. He stayed not because someone told him to, not because he thought it heroic, but because she was his sister, and that was enough. Ginny had not merely been manipulated by the diary, she had poured herself into it. Every fear, every hope, every fragment of her 11-year-old heart had been fed to a soul that once belonged to Lord Voldemort. The guilt that followed wasn't logical, it rarely is. She felt that she had betrayed her friends, her school, even her family. She cried often in private, waking in the night from nightmares, and spent long hours avoiding the company of other students. Ron noticed, and Ron, in his own clumsy, honest, deeply human way, acted. He didn't try to fix her with grand speeches. He didn't tell her to just forget it. Instead, Ron lingered beside her at breakfast, even when his friends went on without him. He offered her extra slices of toast, buttered just the way she liked, as though the world hadn't changed. He played wizard chess near her chair in the Gryffindor common room, muttering snide comments to his pieces, fully aware she was listening, even when she pretended not to be. His pieces shouted curses and insults at each other in ridiculous voices that made her lips twitch against her will. And every time she glanced up with that ghost of a smile, Ron saw it and quietly carried on. In one such moment, Ron deliberately let his rook leap off the board, screaming, "I quit! This family is mental!" Ginny giggled. It was a sound Ron had been waiting days to hear. Not a laugh, not a chuckle, just the smallest hint of her old self. He never pointed it out. He only gave a satisfied grunt and went back to battling his knight. That was Ron's way, not drawing attention to her healing, but planting it gently like a seed in spring. During lunch in the Great Hall, he would drop ridiculous rumors in her ear, whispered so the others wouldn't hear. Stories like how Percy had once asked a mirror if it thought he looked important enough. Ginny would snort into her pumpkin juice. When she bit her lip to stifle it, Ron would grin and nudge her elbow. Again, no fanfare, no declarations, just Ron being Ron, pulling her back to herself one smile at a time. Hermione, ever perceptive, once caught Ron slipping his chocolate frog into Ginny's satchel and said, "That was kind." Ron shrugged and mumbled something about how she wasn't eating much. But the truth was deeper. He remembered how she used to hoard chocolate frogs for card collecting, how she'd once traded 3 to get a rare Merlin card. That Ron remembered this detail in a year so heavy, when so much else clamoured for his attention, spoke volumes. Harry, for all his closeness with Ron, often didn't know what to say to Ginny in those days. He was still a boy, still learning the landscape of his own emotions, and Hermione, for all her empathy, couldn't fully reach Ginny's guilt. But Ron could. Not because he had the right words, but because he chose to stay, because he understood that sometimes words are less important than a warm presence and a ridiculous chess piece yelling, "I demand a new owner." The book gives us a glimpse of this care, tucked between action and recovery. Rowling writes, Ginny seemed very subdued, and Ron spent most of his time beside her, not asking questions, but simply being there. That line, so quiet in its phrasing, holds more weight than an entire scene in a film might convey. It reveals that Ron knew better than to push her to talk. He understood that the hurt she carried was too tangled for easy conversation. This Ron, the one who is not just brave, but tender, not just funny, but perceptive, is often eclipsed in the films. He is reduced to comic relief, a sidekick for laughter. But this moment with Ginny reveals the depth that the books allow him to have. He is, above all, a brother, a real one, the kind who will sit beside you in silence if it helps, who will trade his last chocolate frog just to see you eat something, who will make a fool of himself if it means hearing you laugh again. At one point, when Ginny asked hesitantly if everyone hated her for what happened, Ron snapped, not with anger at her, but at the very idea. "Don't be thick," he said gruffly, then looked away before she could see the emotion in his eyes. That kind of protectiveness masked as sarcasm is pure Ron. He never wanted her to see how worried he'd been, but he had cried, just once, behind the curtains of his bed, because for a moment he thought he'd lost his sister. Even Fred and George, usually the kings of mischief, softened around Ginny in those days, but it was Ron who stayed most consistently. It was Ron who noticed that she hesitated before entering the common room, who casually walked with her so she wouldn't have to go in alone. It was Ron who, when Ginny said she didn't want to go to Hogsmeade, stayed behind with her even when Harry and Hermione went ahead. No one told him to. He didn't even mention it. He simply said he had homework, then played exploding snap with her for an hour, letting her win, though pretending it was luck. The bond between siblings is often messy, unspoken, filled with arguments and shouting matches, but in the worst moments it reveals itself with ferocity and tenderness. That's what this scene gave us in the book, a rare view into Ron's soul, unfiltered by humour or jealousy or insecurities. In helping Ginny heal, Ron unknowingly stepped into a role more powerful than any wand or potion. He became her anchor. It's tempting to imagine how this could have looked on screen. A small moment in the common room, Ginny curled up by the fire, silent. Ron walking in, carrying 2 butterbeers, tossing one to her with a careless catch, and sitting beside her without another word. The fire crackling. The weight of what happened between them, unspoken, but understood. The flicker of a smile. It wouldn't take much, just a glance, a shared silence, and a brother who showed up. And perhaps that is why the omission of this moment in the films stings so much, not because it was essential to the plot, but because it was essential to Ron. It was the kind of scene that defines character not through action, but through care. And Ron, so often cast in the shadow of others, deserved that moment to shine, not for glory, but for love. Ginny, for her part, never forgot. Years later, when asked about her strength during the Second Wizarding War, she often said it came from her family, but in the stillness of her words, she always looked toward Ron, because before the DA, before the Battle of Hogwarts, before she became a fierce fighter, there was a year when she almost broke, and a brother who refused to let her fall apart. Ron's protection of Ginny wasn't dramatic. He didn't slay monsters for her. He didn't cast powerful spells. He simply stayed. He watched. He remembered what she loved and made sure it was near her. He reminded her of herself when she was losing track. And that kind of heroism, quiet and unseen, is often the rarest of all. In a world of magic and monsters, it's easy to forget that healing doesn't always come from a wand. Sometimes it comes from a brother who makes you laugh when you'd rather cry. A brother who understands that guilt isn't cured with logic, but with love. A brother who never says the right thing, but always shows up. That was Ron. And in that quiet season after the chamber closed and the danger passed, he proved he was more than a friend to the hero. He was a hero in his own right. Number 18 gave Hermione the tales of Beedle the Bard. In the bitter cold of that long and harrowing winter, while snow buried the trees and silence stretched across the empty hills, a moment of warmth flickered briefly within the darkness that surrounded them. It wasn't born of fire or magic, but of something far more powerful, an act of quiet thoughtfulness from someone who, for much of his life, had believed himself forgettable. In the pages of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, buried among the tension and fear, Ron Weasley gave Hermione Granger a gift that spoke louder than any words he could have said, the tales of Beedle the Bard. This was no ordinary gift, and it was never shown on screen. The scene unfolded at Shell Cottage, the sanctuary they reached after the chaos of Malfoy Manor. Ron had already made a difficult journey, not just across a war-torn landscape, but across his own inner doubts. He had left, abandoned them in a moment of despair, then fought through pain and regret to return. His return marked a new version of himself. Stronger, more aware, and for the first time, deeply attentive to the feelings of others. It was Christmas, though the date barely mattered amid the war, and still Ron had managed to give Hermione a present that meant everything. J.K. Rowling writes, with deliberate subtlety, that Ron gave Hermione a new book, The Tales of Beedle the Bard, in a handsome old binding. No fanfare, no grand speech, just a quiet gesture that pierced through the gloom like candlelight. The book itself was significant, a collection of wizarding fairy tales Hermione had never read before, because she was Muggle-born and raised without those magical bedtime stories. This wasn't just a book. It was an offering of connection, of shared culture, of inclusion. To understand the weight of this act, one has to look at who Ron is. The youngest son in a poor wizarding family, constantly overshadowed by older brothers, Ron had long hidden his insecurities beneath jokes and food. He didn't always get things right. He said the wrong words, grew jealous easily, and let his frustration boil over more than once. But this gift was different. It wasn't loud or performative. It didn't ask for attention. He had noticed what mattered to Hermione: books, history, knowledge, and responded in a language she understood better than any other. The gesture also stood in contrast to what Hermione had given him, a hand-knitted hat. Useful, yes, but less personal. Ron, who rarely showed his deeper thoughts, had reached for something symbolic. The binding was old, which meant he had searched or traded for it. In the dangerous world they lived in, even acquiring a book was no simple task. It showed effort. It showed memory. He remembered her fascination with magical heritage, her love for history, and above all, her desire to belong. This single moment, simple and unadorned, revealed more about Ron's growth than any duel or act of bravery. He had always been brave in battle, but this was another kind of courage, emotional awareness. He didn't speak much when giving it, because words had never been his strong suit. But he spoke in action, and the message was clear. I see you. I know what matters to you, and I care. What made the omission of this scene from the film so striking was how much it would have added to Ron's arc. In the movies, his emotional development is often glossed over. He is made into comic relief, the punchline to someone else's joke, but in the books, Ron is layered. This gift is a defining moment that shows not only his love for Hermione, but his understanding of her essence. It is delicate, thoughtful, and rich with unspoken emotion. The book itself, The Tales of Beedle the Bard, became essential later. It wasn't just sentimental, it was critical to understanding the Deathly Hallows. Inside was the tale of the three brothers, the allegory that explained the Hallows' origin. Hermione, who clung to logic, dismissed it at first as fairy tale nonsense. But it was Ron, of all people, who gave her the key to decoding one of the most important secrets in the magical world. Without knowing it, he had given her a map. Dumbledore, in his last will, had intended the book for Hermione, knowing her rational mind needed myth to complete her understanding. But Ron gave it from the heart. And that distinction matters. One came from the calculated foresight of a mentor, the other from love. It was Ron's gift that showed the truest kind of magic, the magic of intimacy, of knowing someone well enough to give what they didn't even ask for. It is worth noting that Hermione didn't gush or weep. She wasn't that kind of girl. She said thanks, simple and quiet, and probably looked down at the cover for longer than she needed to. But for someone like Hermione, who measured life through knowledge and books, this was an acknowledgement that she had found someone who truly understood her. The girl who once cried in a bathroom because Ron insulted her teeth was now holding a piece of his heart wrapped in ancient parchment. The tragedy of the film adaptation was its inability to let Ron be tender. We saw his jealousy, his departure, even his fear. But we never saw his quiet empathy, his gift-giving, his intuitive love. His character suffered for it. Stripped of nuance, Ron's growth felt abrupt. But in the book, with a single sentence, a new book, in a handsome old binding, Rowling restored everything. She showed that Ron had grown not in showmanship, but in soul. There is a symbolic symmetry here. Hermione gave Ron her time, her forgiveness, her unwavering faith when he returned. But Ron gave her a piece of wizarding culture, a thing she had always craved but never dared to ask for. Growing up outside the magical world, Hermione had to catch up fast. She overcompensated with rules, logic, and over-preparation. Ron, who often stumbled through academics, saw this and honored it not with ridicule, but with reverence. And that's the beauty of their relationship. It wasn't built on grand gestures, it was small things. Ron standing beside her at Slughorn's party when she was upset, Hermione helping him study even when he rolled his eyes, Ron throwing himself in front of her during a battle without thinking twice. But the book, this book, was special. It was physical proof of emotional depth. In giving her the tales of Beedle the Bard, Ron also anchored her to something enduring. Fairy tales, like those Muggle children grow up with, help form identity. For the wizarding world, these tales were more than stories. They were moral compasses, mythic teachings. Hermione had read Hogwarts, a history, and every textbook in sight, but she had never been a child of magical storytelling. Ron gave her a piece of her magical childhood that she never had. He gave her roots. This made the later scene in Xenophilius Lovegood's house even more poignant. When they encountered the symbol of the Deathly Hallows and Hermione opened the book to the tale of the three brothers, it was more than academic, it was personal. She carried Ron's gift into battle, into discovery, into myth. And every time she held that book, she held the proof that someone loved her in a language she could understand. One wonders why the filmmakers ignored this moment. Was it too small, not flashy enough for cinema? But in a story about love being the ultimate weapon, this was precisely the kind of moment that should have been preserved. It was love, plain and sincere. And it wasn't between Harry and Ginny or Harry and Sirius, but between two people who had built their bond slowly, stubbornly, and with great care. Ron didn't need to slay a dragon for Hermione to see him. He just needed to notice what others didn't. That she longed for inclusion. That she wanted to feel at home in the world she fought so hard to belong to. That in the middle of war, a book could be an anchor. He saw her, not the clever witch or the bossy prefect. He saw the girl who missed out on stories. In that moment, Ron Weasley became more than a sidekick, more than a comic interlude or the other boy in the trio. He became someone who had grown up, learned empathy, and found a way to show love that didn't need translation. A boy who once handed out sandwiches at the Burrow had now given the gift of memory, myth, and magic, and Hermione, fiercely brave, always guarded, let it in. She didn't have to say much. Her acceptance said enough. In a world unraveling at the seams, where Horcruxes poisoned the air, and every step might be their last, a storybook tied them to something ancient and human, the need to be seen and the courage to give. Ron's gift was not only useful for their quest, it was timeless. Even in the final pages of the saga, when peace returns and time rolls forward, one imagines the tales of Beedle the Bard sitting quietly on a shelf in Hermione's home. Worn now, annotated perhaps, but cherished. Not because of the story of the Hallows, but because of the boy who gave it. Because in the end, when magic and war fade into memory, what remains is the love we pass on, bound in old covers, and given without a single word. Number 19, endured the Horcruxes' influence and returned. Ron Weasley stood in the shadows of Harry Potter for most of his life, often the second choice, the best friend, the comic relief. But deep inside, far beneath the surface, a battle was taking place, one that the films barely touched and which the books etched in magic and blood. When the trio embarked on their harrowing journey to destroy the Horcruxes, Ron was not merely another wand in the fight. He was a vessel of raw emotion, of human vulnerability, and of profound transformation. The locket Horcrux, a twisted fragment of Voldemort's soul, did more than haunt him. It stripped him of illusions, tore open his scars, and forced him to face the darkest version of himself. The locket was no ordinary burden. Passed between them, it infected each with unease, but Ron bore its weight differently. He had always carried a subtle sense of inadequacy, nurtured in the shadows of 6 brothers, each with their triumphs. Bill was brave and dashing, Charlie a dragon tamer, Percy the academic star, and the twins, unstoppable forces of charisma and rebellion. Even Ginny, the youngest, burned with fierce confidence. Ron, the tall boy with red ears and second-hand robes, never truly felt like a hero. The locket knew that. It fed on that. Each day, the locket pressed harder on his mind, whispering half-truths, twisting real memories into cruel torments. It amplified his insecurities until the silence between him and Hermione became unbearable. The long days of travel and despair gave the Horcrux fertile ground. In the films, this is briefly alluded to. Ron storming off in the cold night, angry, bitter. But what's missing is the magnitude of what he overcame. J.K. Rowling's words dive into Ron's psyche with brutal honesty, showing us a boy poisoned by fear, not weakness. When Ron left, he didn't do so out of cowardice. The locket was not just dark magic, it was Voldemort's concentrated malice, a living wound in the shape of jewelry. Ron was emotionally crushed, deceived by its voices that hissed Hermione loved Harry, that he was unwanted, that he was expendable. He had no place among them, the locket insisted, so he left, and immediately regretted it. But regret wasn't enough to bring him back. Redemption came at a far greater cost. The days Ron spent alone were not chronicled in detail, but we are told enough. He tried to come back but couldn't find them. The locket's removal left behind a void, a spiritual hangover. Alone with his guilt and shame, Ron wandered. Then he heard Harry's voice from the Deluminator, a message encoded not just with magic, but with hope. Dumbledore had known Ron's heart. He had seen the storm coming, and in his subtle way gave Ron the light to find his way back. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a test, and Ron passed. When Ron found Harry again, he did so at the banks of a frozen pond where the sword of Gryffindor gleamed beneath the ice, an ancient blade with the power to destroy Horcruxes. Harry nearly drowned trying to retrieve it, caught in the icy trap. Ron, who had once fled in anger, broke the surface and saved him. This moment, left almost untouched in the films, is heavy with meaning. Ron didn't return in a blaze of glory. He returned in silence, action, and sacrifice. But it was the destruction of the locket that truly defined him. When Harry asked him to destroy it, the Horcrux fought back, unleashing images designed to eviscerate his spirit. He saw Harry and Hermione together, whispering, laughing, kissing. He heard their voices confirm his greatest fear, that he was nothing but a joke, the weak link. "Your mother confessed," the Horcrux whispered in the book, "that she would have preferred me as a son, would be glad to be rid of you." The vision was not random. It was a carefully tailored dagger to his soul. Ron trembled. The sword shook in his hand, but he didn't flee. He didn't collapse. He lifted the blade and with a cry born of rage and pain and defiance, brought it down. The locket screamed. It fought, but Ron's will was stronger. He shattered it. In that moment, Ron did not merely destroy a piece of Voldemort's soul. He destroyed a piece of his own self-doubt. This act was a crucible, and he emerged not as Harry's sidekick, but as a hero in his own right. It is crucial to remember that the Horcruxes were not just magical objects, they were emotional mines designed to destabilize and manipulate. Dumbledore himself warned that the soul is an immensely powerful entity, and splitting it, housing it in something material, results in a corruption of both the object and the bearer. That Ron could face such intense psychological torment, and not only survive but destroy it, is a testament to his strength, a strength the films do not fully credit. Hermione's horror upon Ron's return was understandable. She had watched him leave and was left with the pieces, but what she didn't see, and what the audience of the films missed, was what Ron went through in the shadows. The journey wasn't just about the physical distance he crossed to return. It was about the inner war, the silent victories against a voice that knew his every wound. Ron's pain was real, but so was his resolve. Ron's arc here is a mirror of the classic hero's journey. He is cast out, faces death, both literal and spiritual, and returns transformed. The films make a brief nod to his return, but they never allow the audience to sit in that pain, to understand the cost. When Harry opened the locket for him, he knew Ron had to be the one to finish it. It was personal. Only Ron could silence those voices. That was his cross to bear. What makes Ron's destruction of the locket so powerful is that he did it in spite of the magic working perfectly. The locket did what it was supposed to do. It hurt him. It filled his mind with poison, but Ron fought through it. Not because he was impervious, but because he was human. The most dangerous magic is not always the one that hurls fire, but the one that whispers what you already fear. That's what Ron beat. This event reshaped the dynamic of the trio. Harry now saw Ron not as just another companion, but as someone who had chosen to return from the brink. Hermione, though hurt, understood the enormity of what he had done. And Ron himself walked differently afterward. He no longer needed to be told he mattered. He knew. Rowling never made her characters perfect. She made them real. And Ron's reality was full of flaws and strength born of suffering. The sword of Gryffindor appears only to those who are truly worthy. It came to Harry, but it was Ron who wielded it. This symbolic transfer of power speaks volumes. Gryffindor's sword goblin-made and steeped in courage, required more than brute force. It needed purity of intent, the kind that comes from facing death and despair. Ron, at that moment, was worthy. The films, in focusing on visual spectacle, missed the spiritual weight of that gesture. It's easy to celebrate Harry, the boy who lived, the chosen one. But Ron was the boy who returned, who looked Voldemort's soul in the eye and said no, he wasn't chosen. He chose. And that kind of courage, the kind that arises not from destiny, but from choice, is rarer and more profound. The moment he destroyed the locket was not just about the mission. It was about reclaiming his identity, free from comparison. The words Ron heard from the Horcrux were not new. They were echoes of what he feared people thought all along. This is what made it so cruel. But even when the image of Harry and Hermione kissing taunted him, even when his mother's voice cut through him like a blade, he still moved forward. He raised the sword in both hands and plunged it into the locket, which broke open with a scream that was more human than anything Harry had heard come from a Horcrux. That scream wasn't just Voldemort's, it was Ron's pain being released. That Ron could walk back into camp, face Hermione's fury, and not defend himself with excuses shows the depth of his transformation. He didn't return for forgiveness. He returned because it was right, because Harry needed him, because the war was bigger than his wounds. This humility, this quiet strength, makes his character arc one of the richest in the series, a fact too often glossed over. In a world filled with chosen ones, wise headmasters, and dark lords, Ron's humanity is a quiet rebellion. He bleeds, he stumbles, and yet he stands. The destruction of the locket is his defining moment, not because he saved the day, but because he saved himself. The films might have dimmed this chapter, but the books remember, and so should we. Ron Weasley's trial under the locket wasn't a moment of failure. It was a battlefield of the soul, and he won. Number 20 rebuilt trust with Harry after their fight. When Ron Weasley disapparated into the unknown, leaving behind Harry and Hermione in the freezing wilderness of the Horcrux hunt, it was more than just a dramatic exit. It was a break in a bond forged over 7 years of shared pain, triumph, and childhood dreams. It was betrayal not in the grandiose form of dark magic or secret allegiances, but in the deeply human form of abandoning a friend when they were needed most. And while the films chose to gloss over the complexity of Ron's return, the book allowed this moment to breathe, to evolve into one of the most emotionally raw and truthful arcs of Ron's journey to maturity. It wasn't about heroics, it was about remorse, about building back what was lost. When Ron returned, wet and shivering and burdened by guilt, the campsite did not welcome him with open arms. It greeted him with silence. Hermione's tears were not tears of joy. They were filled with disbelief and fury. And Harry, though more reserved in his reaction, could not simply pretend that Ron's departure hadn't left a scar. The trust had been fractured. For the first time, Ron stood not as a loyal sidekick, not as the comic relief, but as a young man who had failed, who had fled, and who had to earn his way back. He understood that words alone wouldn't be enough. Apologies were merely the beginning. Ron's apology, when it came, wasn't polished. It was mumbled and awkward and halting, because that's how real apologies often are. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I left. I know I was But Harry didn't let him finish. The silence that followed spoke louder than anything, and while Harry didn't banish him, neither did he offer immediate forgiveness. Ron's return was not the conclusion of the conflict, it was only the beginning of the healing. What made this section of the book so heartbreakingly honest was that Ron didn't demand to be forgiven. He didn't expect to pick up where things left off. Instead, he set about proving his worth all over again, not with grand speeches or melodramatic declarations, but with action. He carried more than his share of the weight, literally and figuratively. He took the first watch during cold nights, volunteered to scout unfamiliar areas, and never once complained when things got worse. The burden of the Horcrux still weighed heavily on all of them, but Ron never asked to wear it again. He understood that part of redemption meant stepping back and letting others lead. During one particularly tense moment, Ron saved Harry's life when he was dragged into a frozen lake while trying to retrieve the sword of Gryffindor. The act itself was heroic, but it wasn't the sword or the salvation that marked Ron's growth. It was what followed. He stood, shivering, the sword in his hand, and he looked at Harry, not with triumph, but with the vulnerability of someone desperately hoping to be seen again, truly seen. "Why didn't you take the Horcrux off?" he asked. But there was no blame in his voice, only pain, only a desire to be better. Even after this moment, Ron didn't let it be the defining act of his redemption. He kept showing up. He began offering suggestions, sometimes smart, sometimes impulsive, but always with the energy of someone who wanted to matter. He became fiercely protective of Hermione, careful not to invade her space after the way he'd hurt her, but always near, always present. He laughed less, spoke less, but listened more. The impulsive boy who had once mocked house elves now risked his life to save them. "We should help them," he said, almost shocked by his own words. And Hermione had looked at him, stunned, as if seeing him anew. Trust once broken doesn't mend in a day. It rebuilds in layers, through gestures, shared dangers, and wordless loyalty. And Ron, though he still bore the shame of his failure, began to earn that trust back, one painful inch at a time. There were nights when Harry caught him staring into the fire, silent and far away, his eyes shadowed by something deeper than regret. The Horcrux had infected his fears, yes, but it had also revealed a part of himself he was ashamed of, the jealousy, the inferiority, the fear of being second best. But facing those feelings and not running from them again was what made Ron's redemption feel real. In the days that followed, Ron's jokes slowly returned. Not the reckless kind, but the warm, dry humor of someone trying to bring back the light. He began to laugh again, carefully, like testing the water. He teased Harry for his hair, for his moodiness, and once for his terrible planning skills. "You know, mate," he said, while deciphering one of the clues Dumbledore had left behind, "for a chosen one, you really do rely on Hermione a lot." But it wasn't said to wound, it was said to connect, and Harry had smiled, just slightly, but it was a start. One night, as they lay beneath a makeshift tarp, while snow battered the trees, Ron passed a blanket to Harry without a word. He waited until Harry took it before whispering, "Thanks for not hexing me when I came back." It was a half-joke, half-confession. Harry didn't reply immediately, but he shifted closer. In that moment, something small and invisible passed between them. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step toward it. The book gives us that journey, the slow return, the hesitations, the effort. The film simply skips it. One moment Ron is gone, the next he is back and all is well. But in the pages of Deathly Hallows, Ron's path is messy and real. It reflects what true friendship demands, not just presence, but persistence. Not just apology, but change. His story becomes a mirror for anyone who has ever failed someone they loved and wondered whether they could ever be trusted again. In one of the quietest, most beautiful passages, Hermione speaks about Ron's return after he destroys the locket. Just because you've got the emotional range of a teaspoon doesn't mean we all have. But the truth was, Ron had grown. He had learned to feel deeply, to hurt deeply, and most importantly, to change. His efforts were not about impressing anyone anymore. They were about honoring a friendship he realized was worth everything. There's a moment when they're hiding in the forest, and Harry, looking at Ron, finally begins to let his guard down. It's subtle, a shift in posture, a question asked, a smile shared. It's how people really come back together, not with fanfare, but with a series of silent reconciliations. Ron knew he had to earn every one of them. And so he did. When they broke into Gringotts, Ron's courage wasn't loud. He didn't lead. He didn't demand. He simply followed through with loyalty so unwavering it made you forget he had ever left. He wasn't looking to be forgiven anymore. He was simply being a friend. And that consistency, that quiet redemption, was more powerful than any apology could ever be. Later, when they prepared for the final battle, it was Ron who ran into the room of requirement beside Harry, not behind him. They were equals again, not because the past had been erased, but because it had been processed, absorbed, accepted. Ron had owned his mistake. He had chosen to be better, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. One of the most tender examples of his growth was during the Battle of Hogwarts, when he saw Hermione run into danger and without hesitation followed, not because of romance, not even because of fear, but because he would never leave her again, never. He had learned what it meant to lose something irreplaceable, and he would not repeat the same mistake. What had made Ron's arc so vital in the books was its emotional truth. He wasn't perfect. He was insecure, moody, sometimes selfish. But he was also brave, loyal, and willing to change. That combination made him real, relatable, human. He wasn't the chosen one. He wasn't the genius. But he was the boy who came back and stayed, and proved that forgiveness must be earned, not assumed. In the film, we lose that nuance. We lose the depth of his struggle, the tension between Harry and Ron, the rebuilding of a broken friendship. It's all condensed into a quick hug and a few lines of dialogue. But in the book, it's a whole emotional subplot. It's about pain, pride, shame, and the fight to grow up. It's about the quiet strength it takes to admit you were wrong and to keep showing up even when you're not sure you'll be welcomed. The scene that never made it to the screen is not one moment, but a tapestry of small scenes, of glances, of shared silence, of awkward jokes and unspoken fears. It is a masterclass in human forgiveness, drawn not in bold lines but in delicate brushstrokes, and it's Ron's story more than anyone's, because he didn't just come back, and he came back changed. He realized that being brave isn't about never running away. It's about coming back when it's hardest. It's about standing beside your friends, not because you have to, but because you choose to, even when they haven't fully chosen you back yet. And that's what makes Ron Weasley a hero. Not a flawless one, but a real one. When the dust of the war finally settled and Harry looked around for the people who had stood beside him to the very end, Ron was there, not in the shadow of anyone else, but in his own earned light. The boy who once feared being second best had become someone whose loyalty and growth made him irreplaceable. And that journey, the one skipped by the films, is one of the most beautiful parts of the entire series. Number 21. Stood by Hermione after she erased her parents' memories. Of all the moments that shaped Ron Weasley's growth in the shadows of Harry Potter's larger-than-life legacy, few are as haunting and beautiful as the one the films chose to leave behind. In the stillness of a modest London home, beneath the ticking of an ordinary clock, Hermione Granger stood at the brink of an unthinkable decision. Her wand quivered slightly in her hand. Her parents, Wendell and Monica Wilkins, no longer Mr. and Mrs. Granger, smiled in the direction of the family photo album she had enchanted. They would not remember her, not the daughter who sat at their dinner table, who cried over her Hogwarts letter, who once begged for braces because she thought crooked teeth made her look foolish. That daughter, by her own spellwork, was gone, not dead, but erased. And Ron Weasley stood by, his silence becoming an anchor to a girl on the verge of drowning. Hermione never wept openly, not the way others might. Her pain rarely spilled in the form of loud sobs or dramatic gestures. But Ron knew her well enough by now. He could read the set of her shoulders, the subtle tremble of her chin, the way she avoided eye contact when words would crack her open. She had made her choice to protect them. I've also modified my parents' memories so that they're convinced they're really called Wendell and Monica Wilkins, she explained later to Harry in the Deathly Hallows, her voice strained but steady. "I've given them new identities, sent them to Australia. That way, they're safe." The courage it took to sever that bond was immense. Yet Ron was the only one who had been present for the act itself. He had accompanied her to the Granger's house, not because she asked. She hadn't. Hermione rarely asked for help. She had intended to go alone. But Ron followed anyway, his instincts honed not just by friendship, but by a deepening, wordless understanding of who she was. He knew she would never show the world what this choice cost her. But someone had to witness it. Someone had to be there to carry a sliver of the weight. And so he went, not as a savior, not as a strategist, but as a boy who had come to love a girl for reasons deeper than she would ever know. They stood outside the house as the sun hovered low behind the rooftops. The lights were on inside. Her father's silhouette passed in front of a curtained window. Hermione exhaled slowly, her breath clouding in the cooling air. The moment had arrived, and there was no turning back. She reached into her pocket for her wand, her fingers brushing the photograph she kept folded there. A photo of the three of them on a beach in Devon, her arms looped through her parents, all of them grinning. She would take nothing else, only the spell, only the goodbye. Ron watched her from a few steps behind. He said nothing, not because he didn't care, but because he did. In his silence, he offered her a sanctuary. There was no urging, no reassurance, no condescending attempt to comfort her. Only presence, only warmth. When her hands began to tremble, he stepped closer, just close enough. She didn't need to look at him to know he was there. That was the point. When her voice wavered during the incantation, when her lips moved and the spell reshaped the world of two innocent muggles, he didn't flinch. He stood steady for her. Inside, the Grangers blinked, looked at one another, then carried on tidying up a stack of travel brochures. They no longer knew the girl outside, but she knew them, and when she turned away, her steps uneven, it was Ron who caught her elbow, not to lead her or hold her, but just to steady her. His touch was light, respectful, a tether, not a cage. In that second, Hermione allowed herself a flicker of weakness, a breath, a single tear hastily wiped away, and Ron simply nodded, his face pale but resolute. No questions, no comments, just the gravity of someone who understood loss without needing to name it. That moment did not make it into the films. The visual adaptation of the Deathly Hallows begins with Hermione wordlessly casting the spell, a tragic echo of her true sacrifice. But Ron's role, his silent compassion, his quiet moral backbone, was omitted. And in doing so, the depth of his character was also dimmed. For Ron has always been the heart of the trio, though less dramatic than Harry, less brilliant than Hermione. He loves without performance. He listens when others speak. He sees things not as they appear, but as they are. And that day he saw Hermione in her most fragile state and stood beside her without trying to fix it. What Ron did was not grand or cinematic. It was not the sort of heroism that gets enshrined in song or battle lore. But in that suburban street, as the sky dimmed and Hermione's world unraveled, he became exactly the kind of hero she needed, one who doesn't run when things get unbearable, one who doesn't turn away from another's pain. And Hermione, though she would not speak of it aloud, felt it. The presence of someone who did not pity her, but honoured her sorrow. That kind of companionship is rare, and Ron offered it with the sincerity only he could. Later, as they camped in forests and scoured ancient texts for clues to Voldemort's Horcruxes, that moment remained between them, unspoken, but felt. It was in the way she reached for him when nightmares stirred her, in the way he deferred to her judgment when tension rose, in the way she held his gaze longer than necessary, the echo of that night still humming between them. Ron had entered her private grief and emerged not as an intruder, but as a guardian of its weight. He had seen her pain and chosen not to exploit it or retreat from it, but to dwell beside it until she was ready to move again. This silent act of empathy defined Ron more than any spell he ever cast. It was not in the destruction of a Horcrux or his return after leaving the group that his truest colours shone brightest, but in this quiet loyalty. Many admired his bravery in diving into the lake to retrieve the sword of Gryffindor. But it was this scene, his unseen steadiness outside the Granger's house, that revealed the kind of strength that often goes unnoticed in the noise of war and glory. The strength to be still. The strength to bear witness. Hermione, brilliant and proud, would rarely permit herself the luxury of emotional collapse. But with Ron nearby, she didn't have to collapse to be seen. He could read the spaces between her words. She didn't need to explain the crushing loneliness of removing herself from her parents' lives. She didn't need to justify her decision. Ron never asked if she was sure. He never demanded she reconsider. He simply accepted that she would do what was necessary and that doing so would cost her dearly. In that way, Ron functioned not as her conscience, but as her companion. He didn't moralize or challenge her. He trusted her sense of right and wrong. And by refusing to impose his own perspective, he gave her something rarer than advice. He gave her validation. Not approval, not pity, but a quiet nod that said, "I see you. I know this hurts, and I'm here." Their friendship had always been fiery, full of bickering, rivalry and tension, but this moment transcended all that. It was not about romantic attraction or intellectual compatibility. It was about something far more enduring, emotional trust. Hermione allowed him into her private sorrow, not through words, but through shared space. And Ron proved himself worthy of that trust by not breaking it. Though the story moves on into forests and tents, betrayals and redemptions, that scene lingered. It shaped their bond. It solidified Ron's place not just as a friend, but as a soul who could carry another's pain without making it his own. It was the kind of love that doesn't demand center stage, the kind that quietly follows someone into their darkest hour and waits there until the light returns. And for Hermione, who had always relied on logic and plans, that intangible support became more valuable than any spell. In the chaos of war, in the sleepless nights and the weight of decisions that changed the course of lives, she knew there was one person who had seen her vulnerability and responded not with shock or panic, but with calm. Ron was, in many ways, underestimated, overshadowed by Harry's legend, often the comic relief in moments of tension. But scenes like this, buried in the pages of the book, revealed the depth of his heart. He may not have had the glory of a chosen one, but he was chosen again and again by those who mattered, because when they faltered, he held the line. That night, after Hermione left her parents' home, they didn't speak about it again. There were no debriefings, no unraveling of emotions, just a shared glance when they arrived back at the burrow, and an unspoken agreement that some things were too sacred to dissect. In that silence, Ron once again said everything. He didn't need to offer comfort in words. His very presence was the comfort. He knew the strength it took for Hermione to erase herself from her parents' lives, and he honored that not by trying to undo it, but by being the first to witness it and carry it with her. That is a kind of bravery all its own, one the films never showed, but the book remembers. And so should we. Number 22 supported Harry's decision to sacrifice himself. Ron Weasley had always been the unexpected constant in Harry Potter's chaotic life. He was never the chosen one, never the boy with the lightning scar, never the genius of the trio. But when it truly mattered, when loyalty was no longer a word but a silent decision made in the heart, Ron stood where many would have fallen. In the final act of the Deathly Hallows, when Harry made the most selfless decision of his life, to walk into the Forbidden Forest and die at the hands of Voldemort, Ron's role was subtle, quiet, and infinitely powerful. It was a moment that never reached the silver screen, but in the pages of the book, it stood as a testament to the kind of friend Ron had become. The film adaptation rushed past this moment, reducing the gravity of Harry's decision and leaving little room for Ron's quiet understanding. But the book told a different story, one of silent courage, of an unspoken goodbye, and of trust that didn't need to be voiced. When Harry realized he was a Horcrux and that he must die to destroy the final piece of Voldemort's soul, he didn't cry or panic. He accepted his fate with the calmness of someone who had grown far beyond his years. And as he prepared for what he believed would be his final walk, there was Ron, not asking questions, not stopping him, not pleading, just watching, with eyes full of understanding. There's something incredibly human in the way Ron reacted. He didn't need explanations. He had grown up in the shadow of brilliance, of prophecies and destinies, but he had learned to see the world through the lens of love. And in that moment, Ron knew what Harry was going to do. He saw it in the set of his shoulders, in the solemn determination in his eyes, and instead of standing in his way, he allowed Harry the dignity of his choice. That is friendship in its most selfless form. Ron was sitting beside Hermione. They looked badly shaken. Hermione's eyes were puffy, and she kept clutching Ron's arm, but neither of them tried to stop him. They seemed to understand. This simple line from the book, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, speaks volumes. The films missed it entirely, choosing spectacle over soul. But in Rowling's words, readers found the truth. Ron understood. He felt what Harry was doing, and his silence was his way of honoring it. It is this kind of narrative, the kind that doesn't shout but whispers, that defines Ron as a character. He was always loud, often jealous, sometimes brash. But when the time came to let Harry walk alone, he became something else entirely. He became still. And in that stillness he showed a depth that no wand could conjure, no battle could forge. He became a man. There's no greater contrast than comparing Ron's behavior in earlier books to his silence here. The boy who once stormed off during the Horcrux hunt, driven by insecurities and fear, had grown into someone who could watch his best friend walk into what he believed was certain death and not beg him to stay. That transformation wasn't loud or dramatic, it was real. It was earned through pain, forgiveness, and time. The Forbidden Forest loomed like a grave, and Harry walked toward it as if pulled by invisible threads. Ron, who had always hated spiders, the darkness, and the unknown, didn't follow. He didn't throw himself in front of Harry. He didn't demand to be told what was happening. He simply looked at him, and in that look, Harry found peace. There was no resentment, no fear, only a quiet kind of reverence. It's almost painful how beautifully tragic that moment is. Ron's acceptance is the kind of love that doesn't try to possess or control. It's the kind that trusts without needing answers. It's the kind that stands back when it would be easier to hold on. That kind of friendship is rare, even in fiction. And Ron Weasley, so often dismissed as the comic relief, embodied it perfectly. One might expect Hermione to be the one who understood most quickly, given her intellect and emotional awareness, but it was Ron who first felt the shift. Perhaps because he had lived beside Harry for so long, perhaps because he too had danced with death so many times, perhaps because, deep down, Ron knew that Harry had always been walking toward this. And now, finally, Harry had stopped resisting the pull. When Harry used the resurrection stone, when he saw James, Lily, Sirius and Lupin walking beside him, Ron wasn't there. But in many ways, his absence was more powerful than his presence could ever be. He had already given Harry what he needed most, not words, not comfort, but permission. Permission to go to face the end on his own terms, to be the hero no one ever truly wanted to be. There's a moment in the book where Harry looks back at the castle, at all he's leaving behind. He doesn't say goodbye, he doesn't need to, because Ron's goodbye had already happened, quietly, respectfully. That's the kind of detail that film cannot easily capture, but books do with grace. It's in a look, a breath, a shared silence. It's in a friend letting you go. If Ron had tried to stop him, it would have broken the spell. It would have made Harry's choice harder. But he didn't. And maybe it was the hardest thing Ron had ever done, to sit still, to say nothing, to trust that Harry was doing the right thing. That kind of bravery often goes unnoticed, but it is, perhaps, the greatest kind. When the battle was over, and Harry returned alive, Ron didn't demand explanations. He didn't ask how or why. He just accepted it with the same grace he had shown before. That consistency is what makes Ron's arc so moving. He didn't need to understand every detail to be there. He didn't need proof to believe in Harry. He believed in the heart of him, and that was enough. The story of Ron Weasley is not one of grand gestures, but of quiet evolution, of a boy who grew into his own strength by standing beside someone else. And in that final hour, he didn't fade into the background. He became the invisible foundation that made Harry's choice possible. Without that support, Harry's walk to the forest would have been far lonelier. It's heartbreaking to think that many viewers of the films will never see this side of Ron. They'll miss the depth, the quiet maturity, the heartbreaking dignity of his silence. They'll never know how much strength it took not to act, not to scream, not to hold Harry back. But readers know. And once you've seen it on the page, you never forget it. The power of this scene lies not in what was said, but in what wasn't. Ron's eyes told Harry everything. I know what you're doing. I wish you didn't have to, but I understand. And that understanding was a gift. It allowed Harry to walk into the darkness, not just with courage, but with love behind him. It's easy to praise heroes who fight with wands and fire and fury. But the heroes who sit in silence and let someone go, that's a rarer kind of bravery. Ron was that hero. Not the boy with the scar, not the one with the plan, but the friend who stayed behind when it mattered most and let destiny unfold. Even now, years later, that moment stands as one of the most profound in the series, not because it changed the outcome of the battle, but because it revealed the strength of a friendship that had been tested 1,000 times and survived. Ron didn't stop Harry. He let him go, and in doing so, he honored everything they had fought for. We often talk about the cost of war in terms of lives lost, but the cost of love, of friendship, of letting go, that is a price rarely acknowledged. Ron paid it in full that night, not with tears, not with speeches, but with trust. And that trust carried Harry all the way to the forest floor, where he met death not as a sacrifice, but as a friend. Ron's finest moment wasn't in battle. It wasn't when he destroyed a Horcrux or saved a friend. It was when he did nothing, when he trusted Harry enough to say goodbye without saying a word. That kind of love is not loud, it doesn't need to be, it just is. And in the quiet before the storm, it stood unshaken. Number 23 helped Harry find the lost diadem. Of all the scenes that were sacrificed in the transition from page to screen, few feel as unjustly dismissed as the moment Ron Weasley helps Harry discover the hiding place of Ravenclaw's diadem. In the swirling chaos of the Battle of Hogwarts, when every second is precious, and the fate of the wizarding world hangs in the balance, Ron proves himself once again, not just as comic relief or a loyal tag-along, but as a sharp, intuitive mind whose insight makes the next step in the journey possible. In the film, the trio rushes toward the Room of Requirement with urgency, but the pathway to that decision is stripped of its origins. In truth, the very idea to search the room at all comes from Ron, a character too often robbed of his moments of brilliance in the adaptation. It is in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Chapter 31, the Battle of Hogwarts, that this small but vital moment occurs. As they re-enter the castle, through the tunnel from the Hog's Head, and meet up with the remaining members of Dumbledore's army, Harry begins to piece together the location of the final Horcruxes. He has only vague hints to guide him, a memory from Helena Ravenclaw, the idea of a long-lost diadem and an overpowering sense of urgency. But he does not know where to begin. He is searching through mental fog, panicking, turning over every thought he can manage under pressure. Then Ron speaks. Ron's voice cuts through the tension. He reminds them of something they all once discussed, a place where students hide things, old cauldrons, banned objects, even a dragon's egg once. He talks about a room that appears only when someone truly needs it. Hermione recognizes it immediately, but it was Ron who put the pieces together. "What if the diadem's in the room of requirement?" he says. That question changes everything. In that moment, Harry's frantic searching takes form. Suddenly the nebulous idea becomes tangible, rooted in a place they know, a room with which they are deeply familiar. This contribution is not a coincidence, nor is it a lucky guess. Ron remembered a crucial piece of Hogwarts lore because he had paid attention. It is easy to underestimate him in a series where Harry bears the weight of prophecy and Hermione dazzles with intellect. But Ron's strength lies in his awareness, his keen ability to take the pulse of his surroundings, to notice the habits of others, to observe and recall things most people overlook. When they spoke about hidden items at Hogwarts, Ron filed it away. And when the moment came, he retrieved that memory with clarity and conviction. That is not the act of a sidekick. That is the action of a strategist. What makes this moment more striking is the emotional and psychological context around it. Ron has recently returned to the group after abandoning them in a moment of weakness during the Horcrux hunt. His return was dramatic, redemptive, and raw, yet moments like this, where he quietly contributes something vital, show that his redemption was not only in returning, but in continuing to carry his weight. He doesn't seek praise, he doesn't grandstand, he simply offers a solution that might save them all. This is growth, this is maturity. The room of requirement is not merely a storage closet, it is a manifestation of need, a shifting, magical space that only reveals itself under very specific conditions. To suggest it as the diadem's hiding place requires not just memory, but imagination, a willingness to think beyond the ordinary. In naming the room, Ron shows that he is thinking like Voldemort might think, considering not only magical power but psychology. Where would someone hide something they never wanted found? Somewhere invisible, somewhere changing, somewhere forgotten by most, but not by Ron. When Harry hears Ron's idea, it is like lightning striking. The fog clears. Suddenly it makes perfect sense. In Deathly Hallows, the text reads, Ron was already moving toward the stairs. "Let's go," he said. "If we're right, and it's in the room of requirement, we'll need to get in there before anyone else does." There is no hesitation. Ron is leading the charge. In this instance, he is not the follower, he is the pathfinder. Harry and Hermione follow because Ron has given them a direction. In the films, this moment is passed over. The trio simply appears in the corridor outside the room, and Neville is the one who introduces them to its current incarnation as a safe haven. But that moment, while moving, is not the same. It omits the critical spark that ignites Harry's realization. It omits Ron's agency. It leans once again into the cinematic habit of reducing Ron to comic asides and reaction shots. But the book shows a different truth, one that deepens our understanding of who Ron is. Ron has always been underestimated, even by those closest to him. Growing up in the shadow of talented older brothers surrounded by exceptional people, Ron struggles with self-worth throughout the series. His biggest fear, as revealed by the Mirror of Erist and the Horcrux locket, is not of death or monsters, but of being overlooked, of not being enough. That he still finds the courage to speak, to suggest, to lead, is a testament to his heart. This moment with the diadem is not flashy, but it is quietly heroic. When they enter the room, it is exactly as Ron remembered. Towering piles of discarded items, lost treasures, forgotten secrets. The diadem lies hidden within. an ancient artifact, nearly undetectable, stored where even the most curious minds would never think to search. Ron's insight brings them to the very edge of victory. Without it, the final battle might have been lost. This is no small feat. This is strategy meeting instinct. What is perhaps most beautiful about this moment is that Ron never demands acknowledgement. He doesn't linger on his idea or ask for thanks. He doesn't boast. His motivation is not recognition, but resolution. He wants Voldemort defeated. He wants peace. He wants his friends to survive. In a world where power often comes cloaked in arrogance, Ron's humility is a rare and noble quality. The book lets us see this. The movie does not. Ron's character arc is often treated as comic support. The scared boy, the jealous friend, the one with crumbs on his shirt. But the books reveal something richer. He is the one who keeps them grounded. He is the one who voices what others are too proud or afraid to say. He is the one who notices, remembers, and suggests. The Room of Requirement scene is not the first time he has done this, nor the last, but it is one of the clearest examples of his essential role. Even when danger is imminent and the castle is falling apart around them, Ron remains focused. When they reach the room, they are met by Draco Malfoy and his cronies, leading to a confrontation that nearly ends in fire and death. But that danger is only possible because they found the diadem, because Ron got them there. His idea, his memory, his initiative, all of it sets this sequence into motion. Without him, there would be no final duel on the staircase, no destroyed Horcrux, no path to Voldemort's downfall. The Ravenclaw diadem, one of the last pieces of Voldemort's fractured soul, is not just a magical object. It represents wisdom, insight, clarity. That it was Ron, the supposed Joker, who led them to it is deeply poetic. It challenges the assumption that Ron is the least intelligent of the trio. Intelligence takes many forms. Ron's intelligence is not in books or spells, but in intuition, perception, memory. He sees connections others miss. He makes the invisible visible. In a quieter way, Ron's contribution to this moment mirrors Hermione's to the basilisk hunt, or Harry's to the discovery of the Patronus. Each member of the trio shines when the moment calls for them. And this was Ron's moment, not loud, not flashy, but entirely essential. It is heartbreaking that audiences who only saw the films missed it, because it shows Ron at his best, calm, thoughtful, effective. Readers who know the full story never forget this. They know that Ron's heart and head work together, that he is more than a sidekick, that his loyalty is matched by his cleverness. This is a boy who plays chess like a general, who breaks into Gringotts, who notices things others miss. He may be afraid, but he acts anyway. That is what makes him brave. That is what makes him great. There is something deeply moving about the way Ron exists within the story. Not seeking the spotlight, but never shrinking from it when it matters. The diadem moment captures that beautifully. It is a scene of clarity and action, a moment where a single sentence changes the course of a war. That sentence belongs to Ron. And that truth deserves to be remembered. For anyone who has ever felt overlooked, Ron's journey is a beacon. He shows that quiet strength is still strength, that thoughtfulness is as vital as flashiness, that friendship means showing up and speaking up, even if no one is listening yet. He shows that you don't have to be the chosen one to be chosen over and over again by the people who matter most. In the end, Ron doesn't just help find the diadem, he helps save the world. Number 24 asked Hermione to teach him lock spells. During their restless, danger-laden journey in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Ron Weasley experiences a transformation that goes far beyond what the films managed to capture. One scene, absent from the cinematic adaptation, quietly yet powerfully illustrates Ron's growth. The moment he earnestly asks Hermione Granger to teach him how to open enchanted locks. It is not an act of idle curiosity or a throwaway moment of comic relief. It is a symbolic step in Ron's inner journey, as he finally begins to shed the shadow of being the other one, the one who follows rather than leads, the sidekick of the chosen one and the brainy girl. In this brief, poignant moment tucked within the pages of the book, Ron becomes more than just a loyal companion. He becomes a young man determined to contribute in tangible ways, to no longer be the liability he feared he had become. The scene occurs after the trio has already endured countless hardships. They have escaped Death Eaters, broken into the Ministry of Magic, and wandered the countryside in search of Horcruxes. The locket, one of Voldemort's foul creations, has taken a toll on all three of them, but especially on Ron. After his temporary departure and eventual return, Ron is desperate to prove that he belongs, not merely as Harry's oldest friend, but as an essential piece of the trio's survival. When he approaches Hermione asking to learn how to break through magical protections, it's not just about learning a new spell, it's about reclaiming a sense of agency that has often eluded him in their shared adventures. Hermione's reaction is gentle, but the text makes it clear that she is both surprised and touched. Ron, known more for his impatience and impulsiveness, is now actively seeking to educate himself. He wants to understand, to prepare, to take responsibility. The book notes that he fumbled slightly with the wand as Hermione demonstrated Alohomora again, and although his attempts weren't perfect, he persisted. The charm itself may seem simple. After all, they had been using it since their first year at Hogwarts, but Ron's insistence on mastering it reveals layers of his character that have long been underestimated. It is not about opening just any door. It is about opening the metaphorical doors that have kept him feeling lesser. What makes this scene so evocative is its quiet intimacy. In the midst of war, surrounded by ruin and uncertainty, Ron is choosing to grow, not because someone demanded it of him, but because he wants to. He is no longer the boy who shrinks behind his older brother's reputations, nor the student who feels inadequate next to Hermione's brilliance. He is the young man who understands that the world will not be kind, and that knowledge is not merely power, it is survival. In asking Hermione for help, Ron is not exhibiting weakness. He is showing humility and a desire to improve. For someone like Ron, who has long struggled with feelings of inferiority, this is an act of courage. This moment also offers a powerful contrast to his early years at Hogwarts. Back in the Philosopher's Stone, Ron was content to rely on Harry's instincts and Hermione's intellect. He offered loyalty, humor, and a keen sense of chess strategy, but rarely did he take the initiative in matters of magic. That same Ron who groaned at homework and scoffed at extra study sessions is now the one voluntarily practicing charms, guided not by a teacher but by a peer he once envied. The evolution is subtle but profound. It reveals a boy who has watched the people around him shine and finally decided that he too can stand in the light. The significance of the moment is magnified when one recalls how often Ron has felt like an afterthought. The youngest Weasley son, frequently compared to his successful siblings, Bill, the curse breaker, Charlie, the dragon tamer, Percy, the prefect, Fred and George, the entrepreneurs, and even Ginny, the youngest, and the girl, Ron has struggled to carve out an identity that is his own. His friendship with Harry has always been a source of both pride and pain. Pride in standing beside the boy who lived, pain in being overshadowed by him. This scene, then, is not just about unlocking doors, it is about Ron unlocking his own potential. Even the choice to ask Hermione rather than try and figure it out himself is important. It shows that Ron has come to terms with her intelligence, no longer threatened by it but respectful of it. In the earlier books, he often mocked Hermione's know-it-all tendencies, sometimes out of frustration, other times out of jealousy. But here, he is vulnerable enough to admit that he needs her guidance. It is a mark of maturity that he recognizes where he can grow, and that he turns to the person best equipped to help him, despite any lingering embarrassment. The textual details from the Deathly Hallows show Hermione carefully explaining not only the wand movements, but the intent behind the spell. She notes that Some locks are charmed to resist Alohomora and require more complex unbinding spells. Ron listens closely, asking questions, furrowing his brow, and trying again. He mutters the incantation under his breath, concentrating with a determination that is rare in his earlier depictions. He isn't just mimicking Hermione, he's learning, adapting, and preparing himself for a future in which he might have to take charge. It's particularly meaningful that this growth happens in the shadow of Ron's greatest failure, his decision to leave. When he abandoned Harry and Hermione under the locket's poisonous influence, it was a culmination of all his doubts and insecurities. His return was dramatic, but what followed mattered more. Scenes like this one, his quiet persistence in mastering basic but essential magic, are his way of making amends not just to his friends, but to himself. He is, in essence, rebuilding his self-worth from the ground up, not through grand gestures, but through simple, sincere effort. This moment also foreshadows Ron's future. By the time the war ends and the trio moves on with their lives, Ron becomes a respected member of the wizarding world, not merely as Harry Potter's friend, but as an aura, a husband, a father, and someone who has found his place. Scenes like this offer a glimpse into how that happened. He didn't wake up one day and become capable. He worked for it slowly, awkwardly, sometimes failing but never giving up. His decision to study spells is a step in a longer path of becoming someone who can be depended on not only in battle, but in life. It also strengthens the bond between Ron and Hermione. Their relationship has always been a dance of friction and affection, marked by bickering that masked deeper feelings. In this quiet scene, Hermione sees Ron not as a class clown or a lovable fool, but as someone serious about changing. The trust he places in her, and the patience she shows in return, plants the seeds for the partnership they eventually build. Their love does not ignite with a kiss. It begins here, in mutual respect and shared growth. The symbolism of lock and key cannot be overlooked. A locked door is, by nature, a boundary, a line between what is accessible and what is not. Ron's attempt to master the unlocking charm is his attempt to cross that boundary, both physically and metaphorically. He wants access to more than just rooms or treasure chests. He wants access to knowledge, agency, and equality within the trio. The moment he successfully opens a simple, magically sealed drawer, described in the book as clicking softly open with a tremble of light, he smiles not because he succeeded, but because he believed he could. Even Harry notices the change. The narrative describes how Ron, after practicing for several days, takes the lead in checking perimeters and investigating magical protections around their campsite. Harry doesn't question this change, he simply follows Ron's lead. In this understated shift, Ron becomes not the sidekick but an equal. He has earned it not through birthright or prophecy, but through determination and heart. The film's often focused on the dramatic, on battles and betrayals, on loud magic and loud emotions. But scenes like this one, rooted in quiet personal evolution, are just as crucial to the fabric of the story. Ron's magic is not the kind that dazzles crowds. It is the kind that persists, that grows slowly but steadily, like a flame kept alive in the wind. His journey is not about greatness in the eyes of others. It is about becoming whole in his own eyes. When Ron finally manages to open a more complicated lock, a warded cabinet left behind in an abandoned wizard's safe house, the satisfaction on his face is palpable. The book describes how he grinned, the tension in his shoulders easing, as the cabinet gave way with a gentle snap. Hermione praises his progress, but Ron simply shrugs, brushing it off with a modesty that speaks volumes. He no longer needs external validation. He has seen what he can do, and that is enough. These scenes also enrich our understanding of Hermione. For all her brilliance, she is not condescending or impatient. She teaches Ron not because she pities him, but because she believes in him. Her instructions are clear, her tone calm, her encouragement real. She is not the girl with all the answers. She is the friend who wants her companion to thrive. This shared experience is not a lecture, it's a collaboration, a moment of trust. In many ways, this scene parallels the overarching themes of the series, the importance of choices, the value of perseverance, and the quiet heroism of ordinary people. Ron chooses to learn, he chooses to improve, he chooses not to be defined by his past insecurities or his brief moment of weakness. And in doing so, he becomes a different kind of hero, one whose strength lies not in spells but in self-awareness and growth. The omission of this moment from the films is unfortunate, not because it is spectacular, but because it is real. It shows that bravery doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it fumbles a wand, stammers through an incantation, and tries again. Ron's journey is built on such moments, and in this one small scene, he unlocks far more than just a lock. He unlocks the man he is becoming. Number 25. First, to understand the room of requirement. Of all the moments Ron Weasley contributed to the story, one of the most understated yet pivotal came not from a battle or a brilliant tactical move, but from something as subtle as a memory. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, when the trio is desperately searching for a place to train in secret, it is Ron, often cast as the comic relief or loyal sidekick, who gives the key to solving the problem. The films fail to show this, yet in the book, it is Ron who remembers a particular anecdote about a mysterious room that only appears when someone is in great need. This detail would lead them to the discovery of the Room of Requirement, the single most important safe haven and meeting space for Dumbledore's army. That Ron is the first to bring this up is a testament to his often overlooked intuition, and erasing this scene from the movies was a disservice to his character's quiet brilliance. In that moment, the trio is wrestling with an impossible situation. Umbridge has effectively banned any form of real magical education, and Harry, pushed by Hermione's idea, has agreed to teach students real defense against the dark arts. But where could they meet without being caught? The castle is watched. Spies are everywhere. It's in this moment of tension that Ron, offhandedly and with his usual dry delivery, recalls a story Dumbledore once shared. In the book, he says, "Well, now that you mention it, I have heard Dumbledore talking about a room that a person can only enter when they have real need of it. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it isn't." That comment may seem like background noise to some readers at first glance, but it isn't. It's a narrative turning point. Dumbledore's anecdote, which Ron had absorbed and remembered, was no idle tale. It was a key, one that Harry immediately picks up on. Without Ron's contribution, Harry might never have realized that such a place existed, and the DA might never have formed. And without the DA, the resistance against Umbridge's tyrannical rule in Hogwarts would have been all but impossible. That moment belongs to Ron, and its absence in the films renders a fundamental disservice to the narrative and to his character development. Ron is often portrayed in the movies as the least remarkable of the trio. Hermione is the genius, Harry is the hero, and Ron, well, he's just Ron, but this perception ignores the countless subtle ways he influences the story. This scene is one of them. The brilliance of Ron's moment is not that he solved a riddle or cast a dazzling spell. It's that he remembered. In a world where memory is often the difference between life and death, knowledge and ignorance, Ron's memory was as good as magic. The fact that it's tied to an offbeat story about Dumbledore needing a toilet makes it even more Ron-like, mundane, humorous, and yet deeply important. The anecdote itself is pure Dumbledore, odd, unassuming, and layered with hidden significance. According to Ron's recollection, Dumbledore once told a story about walking past a blank stretch of wall on the 7th floor and suddenly finding a bathroom filled with chamber pots when he desperately needed it. That offhand comment, likely spoken in passing by the headmaster, stuck with Ron. It lingered in the back of his mind, waiting for the right moment to be useful. And that moment came when the trio needed a solution to one of their most dangerous problems, Ron's memory gave Harry the idea, but more than that, it showed how important listening, really listening, could be in a world full of riddles and misdirection. What makes this moment especially resonant is that it emphasizes one of the series' quietest lessons. Sometimes the smallest things matter most. The grand battles and prophecies and propelling forces of destiny are not the only things shaping the wizarding world. Sometimes a boy who is not known for being top of his class, who struggles with self-doubt, and who often fades into the background can be the one who holds the missing piece. Ron didn't shout for attention when he remembered the story. He didn't even realize how crucial it was at first. But he offered it, as he always does, with loyalty and a willingness to help. And in doing so, he set into motion one of the most critical acts of rebellion within Hogwarts. In the Room of Requirement, the students found more than just a place to practice spells. They found community, they found courage, they found a sense of purpose and belonging. All of that started because Ron remembered something. The room itself reflects intention and need. It manifests what people most desire in the moment. But the story doesn't often pause to acknowledge that the original need, the very reason Harry knew to look, came from Ron. In J.K. Rowling's words, sometimes you walk past a place and suddenly it's there, full of chamber pots. Without Ron's recollection of that story, the trio might have missed the room entirely. The exclusion of this scene from the films is not just a minor omission. It's an erasure of a key moment of character depth. Film Ron is reduced to quips and jealous glances, while book Ron is complex, perceptive, and deeply attuned to the people around him. This scene would have offered the perfect opportunity to highlight his thoughtfulness, his connection to Dumbledore's eccentric wisdom, and his value beyond comic relief. It wasn't just about the room, it was about recognizing that Ron listens, that he remembers, and that he acts when it matters most. Harry's reaction in the book is immediate. As soon as Ron shares the story, Harry begins to piece it together. They search the 7th floor, looking for the stretch of blank wall. It takes trial and error, walking back and forth and concentrating hard on what they want. But the room appears just as Ron said it would, and inside it is exactly what they need: cushions, shelves of books, even a whistle for signaling the start and end of practice sessions. It's magical, yes, but it's not the magic of spells. It's the magic of knowledge, of memory, of passing information from one person to another at just the right time. When the DA finally begins their meetings, the impact of Ron's memory becomes even more profound. Every student who learns how to disarm, to shield, to defend themselves, they owe it to that moment. Every hex and countercurse learned in that hidden room traces its roots to that strange little story about chamber pots. Ron doesn't ask for credit, he never does, but his role is vital. He gave them a place to resist, and in a story so often centered on places, Privet Drive, the Burrow, the Forbidden Forest, and of course Hogwarts, it is fitting that Ron would be the one to offer a new sanctuary when it was most needed. The scene also deepens the connection between the trio and Dumbledore, even if indirectly. Dumbledore, ever the enigma, shares wisdom in riddles, in tales that sound nonsensical, but are in fact profound. Ron is the one who understands this best in that moment, showing that he does pay attention, even when others might dismiss such stories as whimsical or useless. There is a silent harmony between Ron's grounded sensibilities and Dumbledore's lofty abstractions. In that sense, Ron acts as a bridge, not just between Harry and Hermione, but between the mundane and the magical, the story and the storyteller. It's also important to note that Ron's contribution here reflects one of his core traits: dependability. He is not always the first to act, nor the loudest, nor the most confident, but he is reliable. When things fall apart, Ron is there. When plans fail, Ron remembers. When a door is invisible, Ron finds the key. And all of that is shown in this scene. It's not flashy, it's not heroic in the traditional sense, but it is essential. The DA needed a leader in Harry, a planner in Hermione, and a connector in Ron. Together they built something powerful. Alone, none of them could have done it. And what's tragic is how the films, by removing this moment, chip away at the balance between the trio. By sidelining Ron's memory, the screenwriters unintentionally diminish the trio's synergy. The room of requirements simply appears as if by fate, and Ron's role is overshadowed. The audience never gets to see how his recollection creates the turning point. And that matters, because Harry's journey is never just his own. It is shaped by those who stand beside him. And in this case, it was Ron who lit the path forward, literally revealing the room where resistance would be born.